1936 and 39, from all over the globe, a total, we think, of around 35,000 volunteers went to volunteer for the Spanish Republic. 2,500 went from the UK. Of that, 550 were killed, and the remainder, nearly every one of them, was wounded. Initially, people just went before there was even any kind of organised battalions to join. People went as individuals. The International Brigades, and I have here a replica of an International Brigade banner. It was a programme initiated by the Soviet Union. There were other organisations that people from Britain joined. The POOM had a militia, and the POOM was an abbreviation for what is in English a Marxist Party of Unification. They were called at the time by many communists as a Trotskyist organisation. They weren't really, but they were certainly not affiliated to the Communist Party. The other militia, which was really significant at that time, was an anarchist militia called the CNT. So they were genuine working class organisations.
Michael, what do you think that motivated these young people to go and fight in Spain, knowing that they may die?
They are told that they may not return. And I had interviewed nearly 30 years ago, a number of volunteers who went, when some of them were teenagers when they went. And I remember one of them, Benny Goldman, telling me that he was told that when he went to the Communist Party district office in Manchester, you realise there's every chance you won't be coming back. And Benny was already involved in street battles with fascists in Britain. And he said to me that he didn't feel it was enough. There's conversations amongst his friends, his comrades. Are you going? Are you going? Let's go. And he left work one afternoon and made his way to London, and then over to Paris, down to the south of France, and then walked into Spain. He wrote, after he'd been there a couple of weeks, to tell his parents where he was. Benny's 18. And Benny went in the January of 1937, and he was waist deep in snow going across the Pyrenees, wearing the clothes that he'd turned up to work in an upholstery factory in Manchester on a Friday. By 6 weeks later, the British were involved for the first time in a huge battle called the Battle of Jarama, and lose something like 200 men on the first day. And that news comes back. It's a huge shock. But what happens? Even more people volunteer. And an overwhelming proportion of people that went to Spain from Britain were Jewish.
My father was Jewish. He went from the Jewish East End. He went out at the end of 1937 at the age of 20. He wasn't actually in the field in Spain very long because he was captured and he was therefore in prison on his 21st birthday. He was in prison for nearly a year in San Pedro, which was essentially a concentration camp. The prisoners in San Pedro were starved, frozen, beaten, and because he was Jewish, they were subjected to particularly harsh treatment. He was so young when he went out. He was barely 22 when he came back to England. And that experience and the relationships that were forged in Spain stayed with him for the rest of his life.
Corner of the world came sailing the 15th International Brigade.
Major Sam Mild, as he became. I know his son, Mike, and has told me a great deal. He was wounded on 4 occasions, if not 5 occasions. And he was decorated by the Republican government and given the Spanish Medal of Valor. The Russians described him, his nickname was the English Lion. He was so brave, he was so courageous, and would never ask a soldier to do anything that he wouldn't do, and he put himself in harm's way a lot. He became the final British battalion commander. For the remainder of his life, he ran the Veterans Association, which was looking after British veterans who'd fought in Spain. The British battalion was part of the 15th Brigade, which was an English-speaking brigade. Language can become, if you like, a liability in combat. The problems of understanding orders.
My partner, David Marshall, was in the International Brigade. He went to Spain. David was a lot older than me, but he went when he was 20. He was a civil servant working in the Dole office in Middlesbrough, and it was the time of the Great Depression. And one day he bought the Times, and there was a short paragraph about what was happening in Spain and about the way the elected Republican government, who'd been elected by all the people, was in danger of being overthrown. And so he thought, well, the working class people have voted this government in, and this is what should happen in all countries, that people should have a say in what's going on in their lives. And that's what moved him to go. And he thought, well, if there's going to be a fight, I'm going to be part of it. And he just said he was going on his holidays and told his parents he was going to stay with his girlfriend, told his girlfriend that he was going hiking with his friend. And he saved some money from his salary, and off he went. And he got to the borders of Spain and France, and they wouldn't let him in because he had no papers to say he belonged to a left-wing organisation. So with his last bits of money, he was sitting in a cafe looking miserable, and this chap came over to him and he said, "Hello, how are you?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I came to fight for the Spanish bloody Republic and they wouldn't let me in." And the man said, "Oh, come on, I'll get you in," and they asked him questions. But anyway, this chap took him over to them and said, "Look, he's an Englishman, young Englishman, he doesn't have any papers. He's, if he was going to be a spy or a narc, he would have every paper that he needed to get in. So obviously he's a fighter who wants to fight for Republican Spain." So they let him in, and off they went to Barcelona. And there's a very famous picture of him and several others, and he's holding a banner, and he's got his shorts on and his glasses, and totally unprepared for war, really. But he was wounded quite early on, and they sent him back to England. And I think he was very lucky in that, because if the International Brigades were formed then, and there were more hospitals, he'd have been patched up and sent back into battle again. And he couldn't walk, he was unable to walk at the time. So they sent him home. He became a communist as well. Spain was a great time in their lives. They went to fight for something that they knew was right.
There is an incredible mystique about the International Brigades, but on the other hand, these are people who have never fired a gun. In the training, they didn't have enough ammunition and they didn't have enough rifles. They were poorly equipped. So they're not experienced soldiers, they've not been properly trained, they don't speak the same language as other people around them, and they're used as a kind of shock troops at the vanguard. They're thrown right in. There are cases in which Pollitt writes to a family in Glasgow, somewhere to say, your son, the standard letter, your son died in combat, and a letter is written back. That's funny, because he's upstairs at the moment. He's been here for 2 weeks. Some people did desert. And what do you do? What do you do to deserters in a volunteer army? They didn't execute them. Most people were just given jobs basically dealing with latrines or something. Was their military contribution significant? I think so, yes. The Jarama Valley was important to Franco because he was trying to encircle Madrid. There is a highway that runs from down the Jarama Valley that connects Madrid to Valencia. And the Spanish government had moved the seat of the government from Madrid in central Spain to Valencia because they were frightened that Madrid might fall. Although the International Brigade took heavy casualties, they held the road right until the end of the war. Prior to that, in November of 1936, there was the siege of Madrid. There were, at Madrid, around 90,000 armed militia. Trade unionists, anarchists, socialists, communists, ordinary people, ordinary Spaniards. And they see off Franco's forces, and they are right at the gate, and their numbers are crumbling, and then suddenly in come International Brigade volunteers from Britain and from France and elsewhere in Germany. They did make a difference militarily at certain battles. They also, I would think, in terms of lifting morale, so that the Spanish people know that they have support and friends all around the world, you know? In terms of changing things in Britain, look, I mean, it changed me. And I was born in 1959 and may be really interested in history. And, you know, I describe it in my book as a beacon of what people are prepared to sacrifice for a cause in another country, because they see those people as their kind of brothers and sisters. Back in the UK, there was an Aid for Spain campaign, which was about sending clothes, powdered milk, food, powdered eggs, money. Collections were made just on the back of a handcart. Plays were written to raise money. Orchestras did all kinds of things. It was a huge movement. There was enormous sympathy for Spain, and people felt, you know, why isn't our government doing more? Why, you know, because the Spanish government was not allowed to buy arms on the open market. And it began to politicise people and let them know what fascism was.
Jimmy Rutherford from Edinburgh. Jimmy was a young lad. He was a teenager. He volunteered, he went over to Spain. He was captured, was put in a prisoner of war camp, was then exchanged later that year for Italian fascists who'd been captured by the Spanish Republican side. He went back to Edinburgh, but then he came back out again. And he'd signed an agreement when he was released that he wouldn't come back and fight. He came back out, he fought, he was captured again. And one of the people that had captured him the first time recognised him. So he was taken out and he was shot. He was executed because of his beliefs. And we're currently trying to get a memorial put up in a little place called Newhaven just outside Edinburgh, where he was from, to remember him and to remember his sacrifice.
So what was the response of the British government to people who went to fight?
Initially, they turned a blind eye to it. Then they leaned on something called the Foreign Enlistment Act, in which they made it illegal. Spain was radicalising people.
So how do you think this is a good example of solidarity?
Well, it's pretty extreme. I mean, everyone who finds out about this story asks themselves, oh, could I have done that? Would I have travelled to a foreign country knowing the chances of being injured or killed are so high, against the express wishes of my government? The International Brigade stands out as a shining example, and the reason why still people remember, they're all gone now, but still people come to remember them and to take this story forward to new generations of young people who might say, well, the world's a messed up place and there's nothing I can do and it's all rigged and, you know, what's the point of anything? Well, look at these people. They knew there was a point to taking action, putting their lives and livelihoods at risk and for something they knew to be right.
All for one, one for all. Sounds very corny, but that's what, for me, what internationalism is.